Welcome to the Adam Michael channel. Today I'm going to be sharing how to make your own guitar using a Squier Telecaster. So I'm not a trained luthier, I'm just a guitar player who is very interested in customizing his own guitar to his own playing style and his needs as a musician. So I'm coming from that perspective. This isn't meant to be a professional series because I don't work in a guitar shop. I just did this on my own and learned a lot over the course of the whole process. So the basic idea was I wanted to create a partscaster and I wanted to use a Squier Affinity Telecaster as the base. And there are other methods I could take. I could pick a different guitar. I could pick up, more mid-range guitar, or I could go to several websites and pick the guitar parts that I wanted to use and mix and match them. But I didn't want to drill, and I also wanted to have the bass parts that weren't going to be relevant to the sound, like the strap buttons, for example. I didn't want to have to go and buy those individual parts. So they came with basic things like a string tree or the strap buttons, like I mentioned. And probably most importantly, it was also painted, which you can get at, I don't want to call them luthier sites, but other websites that sell individual guitar parts. I didn't want to drill and I didn't want to paint. Okay, plus it came with all those bass parts. So that's why I chose the Squier to start with. I was imagining using this guitar for more ambient parts, and I've come to realize that a Telecaster normally isn't used for ambient stuff. Telecasters are typically used for more twangy parts that have more snap to them, and the pickups themselves can be noisy. Okay, but the original idea was to have this sort of ambient guitar with a beach theme. Okay, so this was the basic concept I was working with before I started going after the parts and working on the guitar. So these were the aftermarket components that I wanted to add. I wanted to use a very specific kind of pickups from Porter, the vintage Telecaster pickups, because they're one of the best sets of pickups I've ever heard on any guitar, Telecaster or otherwise. I knew based on research that I was going to need to replace the bridge, just in looking at what people typically replace in a Squier. The claim is that the bridge doesn't hold tuning very well, so I wanted to replace that. I wanted to do the wiring harness because I read that improving the pots can improve the sound. That's debated. I don't know. I can't speak to it either way. It's just something I read, so I wanted to make sure I included it. I wanted to replace the nut. Again, this was something that was kind of universal, that a synthetic nut is not as high quality as a tusk or a bone nut. So I wanted to replace the nut on the neck. And last, just for aesthetic purposes, I wanted to replace the pick guard. Okay, and I was happy to find that for Squier, I didn't have to do any drilling. A ample supply of pick guards for import guitars, specifically a Squier, are readily available. All right, so I'm not going to go through each one of these point by point, but this is just a general list of equipment that you will need if you want to do what I did to this instrument. Okay, you'll need to know how to solder, or some people call it solder. I don't really know the right way to say it, but You're going to need to use one of these kits to do this well and probably have a little bit of experience using it. You'll need a wire stripper. Sometimes when you're using the soldering kit, you'll need to pull some of the rubber off of the wire that you're using in order to make it a strong connection. So having something other than a pair of scissors is going to help a lot. When it comes to the linseed oil, that's an extra that I wanted to use because I wanted to taint the neck of the Squier. And the reason for that is when the Squier came in, the neck made it look like a children's toy. Okay, like something you could get like a first act guitar from Walmart. And I know that those aren't meant to be children's toys. They can probably be modded to look nice, but when someone, or at least when I see that color of neck, it just doesn't look like the real thing. So I wanted to taint the neck a bit more. Okay, and then just basic other parts. The sanding sponge was used to prepare the neck for the linseed oil. Okay, I mentioned the soldering earlier. You need to be good at doing research before you actually start working on the instrument, because the more you know beforehand, the easier it's going to be in the end. And I mean, it takes a long time looking through different builds of guitar, looking for what you need. Like, do you want a fast neck? Do you want a gloss neck? What kind of guitar body are you looking for? What kind of pickups are there? It just seems like there's an endless amount of options to look into. So all the brainstorming, coming up with ideas, making firm decisions on this is what I want this instrument to be, it takes a lot of research. And also finding the parts that fit, that work best. You're going to see I ran into several issues with that, even though I did an enormous amount of research up front. And I'd also recommend knowing how to do a basic guitar setup, because otherwise you're going to have a hard time setting it up to your exact needs. I just looked up soldering versus soldering, and I think in the United States it's soldering. There was an optional British pronunciation for soldering, but I'm in the United States, so I'll call it soldering. Anyway, in addition to soldering and research, it's really important to be able to do a basic guitar setup. And the reason for that is because you're customizing this guitar to your unique needs to really get a good feel for if you succeeded at the objective. You'll need to be able to set it up, like the action, the intonation, what tuning you prefer. For example, I like E flat tuning, so I set up the intonation and the saddles to reflect that. So it is important to have that skill before you get started, so you can finish the process and evaluate if this guitar is a good fit for you for the long term. So this is what the base build looked like. You can see the neck it's very pale. It doesn't really give a good impression of what it looked like when I first got it. It was almost like this pale pinkish kind of hue, and I just didn't like it, so I wanted to taint it. I didn't expect that at first, but that's what I wanted to do. And I used a vintage white color of Squier. And why I like the Affinity series is there are so many options for different color schemes that you can use. So for the design piece, it does make it easy. So some other things that I appreciated, I mentioned this earlier, but to go into a little more depth, the frets were already installed on the neck. There was already a nut slot cut. I think you can get that on most most aftermarket necks, but if you look up a lot of aftermarket necks, they some of them don't have frets installed, and some of them don't come with tuners or string trees or any of the not the tuners, but the small details, or the frets aren't a small detail either, but it makes it a lot easier if it just comes with parts already. And I wasn't planning on replacing the tuners. From what I understand, the tuners are acceptable. Some even say that Squier makes good tuners, so I just left that alone. I wasn't planning on getting new tuners. But another advantage of starting off with a pre-built guitar that's inexpensive is you get all these, they're extras when you're just starting off from scratch with a body that needs drilled, or a neck that needs a nut installed, even though I'm going to do that anyway, or a string tree put in, things of that nature. It makes it simpler to have that stuff already, the small stuff already in place. Okay, I mentioned that it was already drilled. I didn't want to have to drill new holes for a pick guard or install a bridge. I wanted that done before I received the guitar. I mentioned it's already painted. It takes a lot of skill and equipment to be able to put a nice lacquered finish on a guitar body. I mentioned the simple parts. I mentioned the design options. The thing about Squier is there's a lot of options that will fit. For example, the pick guard is a small thing, but when you're buying, for example, I was trying to decide between the Donner and the Squier, and I couldn't find a pick guard where it was like, this pick guard will fit a low cost Donner guitar. And that could end up being a frustration point in the end. When you apply that to the pick guard, maybe that applies to the wiring harness slot. Maybe not. I don't know. I only know the Squier, but the Squier is known for its modding capacity. So a lot of people have already studied how to mod a Squier and can make recommendations on what will fit and what will not fit. All right, the pickups. So Porter Pickups does a great job. The ones that I bought, I think they were $200, the vintage Tele, but as I said earlier, they're some of the best sounding pickups I've ever heard. There's a Worship Tutorials demo that I saw it one time, and even when I was not in the market for a Telecaster, it just stuck with me. It was like, these are the best pickups I've ever heard. And if you don't want to spend $200, they sell still great sounding pickups for $100. So that's what I'd probably recommend if I was going to make a recommendation to someone. Get the Porter Gatekeeper Tele pickups and you won't be disappointed. Okay, but something that I was pleased to find, and I didn't have to do this when I was working with the pots, I ended up buying a wiring harness that allowed for 4-way switching. So a Telecaster normally has a 3-way switch, so I ended up getting that extra tonal option with the 4-way switching, so I was pleased with that. But you don't really have to do a new wiring harness. Okay, so this is just some of the things you'll be working with if you decide to solder. You need to be able to comfortably place those wires into the lugs. That's what the circle, the metal circle where you can slip things through, that's what it's called, as a lug. So that's why the wire stripper comes in handy. Sometimes for that wire, if it's got a hard cutoff at the end where there's no wiring exposed, or something gets torn or cut by accident, you need to be able to easily extend the reach of I'll use the word filament inside the cable or the wire. But this is just what it will look like when you're working on it. So when it comes to pickups, another thing that's nice about Porter is they have plenty of diagrams available for you in terms of connecting their unique pickups to a switch. Okay, and this is important because